All right, well, we are kicking off a brand new series today titled Pillow Talk. Does anybody know what is up on that screen right now? What is that? If you know what it is, say it on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. An 8-track. I know, it's a cassette. I know that. Hey, we are so excited to launch this series titled Pillow Talk. It is a 5-week series where we're going to go verse by verse through the book Song of Songs. And the reason why we've taken Song of Songs as kind of our study text for the next couple of weeks is because we think there are some really powerful precepts and principles and pictures of what it means to have God's perspective on love, sex, in marriage. And we think this is important because we live in a culture that wants to tell us a lot about what love is, wants to tell us a lot about what good sexuality is, and has a lot of opinions on marriage. And we think that it's valuable for all of us to get a good sense of what God's perspective is. Come on, somebody, are we excited about the idea that God has something to say and maybe what he says is a little bit different than culture? You guys ready to hear that today? If you are, give me, put your hands together. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. And the reason why we're really kind of focused on this idea of pillow talk and why there's a cassette tape up there is because if you've ever had a crush on somebody, it usually went along with a song that meant something to you along the way. I don't know, maybe it was a 1960s crooner song, maybe it was something from the 70s. Maybe the 80s, maybe it was the 90s, I don't know. But for me, it was in 2004, all right? That was the date. And there was this woman by the name of Stacy Mantor. She was dating another guy. And I saw this guy, and I just began praying. I was like, Lord, this man is clearly not the person that she is supposed to be with. He's a boy. He's not a man. And God, I know I'm not a man yet, but I'm going to be one day. And I need you to work something out so that she breaks up with this guy so that I can step in and complete her. Jerry Maguire. Like, that's what I was thinking. And so I began praying this way, all that kind of stuff. We were good friends for a long time. And on one fateful night, she breaks up with her boyfriend on a Saturday night. And one of my good friends, who happens to be her cousin, was at her house the night that she broke up with him. And she wrote a letter. And in this letter was her heart and how she kind of felt about me. And I didn't know how she felt about me. And I promise you, I would never be the guy to just step up and ask a girl out on a date, especially at 16. That wasn't going to happen. And so she wrote this letter out, and it kind of pointed to the fact that she was kind of into me. And, you know, it was more so like, this is what this guy was like, and this is what I like about Colin, and Colin's way better than this guy. I'm adding that to the story, but that's kind of the way in which it went. And so my buddy stole the letter from her Saturday night, brought it to me at church Sunday morning, handed it to me, patted me on the back, and said, "You'll owe me for a lifetime." And so that day I got home from church, I opened the letter, I read it, I find, okay, maybe she's a little bit interested in me. I call her that afternoon. The first time the phone rings, I hear her voice, I hang up. Call her again. The second time the phone rings, I hang up. I muster up enough courage, call her a third time. The third time that I call, she answers and she says, "Colin, I have caller ID. I know that it's you." I then professed my love for her, and that began kind of our budding romance. But in 2004, there were 2 songs that marked my emotional state at that time, and both of them were written by America's greatest poet, Usher, all right? And the first one was this song, "Let It Burn," and that song was all about a relationship breaking up, and that was my prayer. God, would you let that relationship that she's got with that guy burn to ashes so that I, like a phoenix, might raise up and be her man, all right? And then the second song when we started dating, I've got to pull this up because I want to get the lyrics just right. The second song was written by Usher as well, and it was this song called My Boo, and it goes like this. Know that you're that one for me. It's clear for everyone to see. Oh, baby. You will always be my boo. Don't you guys just want to like get remarried after hearing that song? Come on. And so there's something powerful about music and romance. And what we find in Song of Songs is a series of romantic songs that we're going to explore over the next couple of weeks. But as we jump into this series, I want to lay out 3 ground rules that I think are so important whenever we talk about relationships, whenever we talk about sex, dating, and because I know that there are people across the spectrum that are in the room. Some of us are happily married. Some of us are not happily married. Some of us are dating. Some of us are single. Some of us are single again. There's a broad gamut. And so as we approach this series, I really believe that there is something in it for all of us. And I'm going to ask you to commit to being here the next 5 weeks because I really think God can use it to transform your life. But here are a couple of ground rules. The first one is this: listen for you, not the person next to you. All right? So ladies in the room, right? Like if you've got, your beau next to you, I don't want to see any of these elbows. All right? None of these elbows. And fellas, if you never amen in any sermon I ever preach, I better not be hearing amens this time. All right? That's the way that we're going to handle this. Listen for you, not the person next to you. Here's the second one. Don't look back. All right? You are a new creation. All of us have a story and a background we don't care to talk about today. Can I get a good amen about that, right? How many of us are grateful that the old is gone, the new is come, and God has called us a new creation? Are we grateful for that, right? So that's the way we're going to think about this series. We're going to have a looking forward kind of faith, a hope-filled faith for what it means to do relationships God's way. And lastly, we're not going to use these messages as ammunition, all right? So I don't want to hear on a Tuesday night, I want to get a phone call from a guy saying, my wife keeps on saying, Pastor Colin said, don't want to be hearing that. We want to allow this series to really be about our relationship with our Heavenly Father. So we want to draw a circle around our feet and only work on the person inside the circle. That will be the most important thing for us as we jump into a topic that is loaded with emotion and different types of perspectives. Today, we're going to talk about attraction and the art of attraction because that's where Song of Solomon begins. And what I love about this story is that as we look at these songs that are being sung, what we're going to find is that there's an arc here towards relationship that really is the idealized version of relationship. I mean, he doesn't always go this way, but this is God's intent. This is God's heart as it pertains to healthy, good, vibrant, romantic relationships. And so today's sermon title, and every single sermon over the next couple of weeks, we'll be using a song lyric or a song title to define it, is this: Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. Frank Valli, 1967. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I want to hold you so much. Amen. There it is. And what we find in this song, and what we're going to find in Song of Songs, chapter 1 verse to chapter 2, verse 7 today, is this beautiful picture of how God has designed attraction. And so we find this, and we start off in chapter 1, verse 1, and it says this: Solomon's Song of Songs. Well, here's what we know, is that what we're going to be reading is the collected works of his best hits. Solomon wrote over 1,005 songs over his lifetime and lifespan. That's what we find in 1 Kings. But what we find in Song of Songs is a collection of some of his best music. It's really the soundtrack, if you will, for a loving, romantic relationship. And what I find so interesting about this is that we know that the characters that are introduced in this story are definitely not King Solomon. King Solomon is not who you learn great romance from. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, all right? He was a train wreck. That is not what you look at in terms of the way in which thinking about relationships. So we don't look at Song of Solomon as a hero. We always look at Jesus as a hero of any text that we're reading, and we'll find God's design here in what we're reading in Song of Songs. So we get this idea of the Holy of Holies or King of Kings. This is the Song of Songs. It's his best music, and the best way to think about it is that you are at a Broadway show. There are different characters, and it's all music, and you've got to lean into some of the artistry and poetry to be able to make sense of the story. And today, as we look at the first couple of verses, we're going to answer this question: how has God designed attraction? How has God made us to be attracted to each other? What is the chronology of attraction that God sees as the ideal when it comes to a romantic relationship? And we're going to start in verse 2 when we find the woman speak first. She says this: Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. This is one of my favorite Bible verses in all of Scripture right here. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. I love this. You'll find that the woman who's in the story, she speaks first, she speaks most, and she speaks last. In fact, she speaks 75% of the time. So it's pretty much just like real life, right? That's what it is. And what we see here in verse 2 is this powerful opener where she acknowledges her own sexual desire. And I think this is so important because maybe you grew up in a Christian subculture or a religious ideology that taught that women ought to repress their sexuality, that sex in some way is a bad thing or a thing that you ought not be talking about, or attraction in itself is a negative thing. In fact, I was researching this week, and Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam all have teachings that tell women that the way in which they have to think about their sexuality is to repress it and to pretend like it does not exist. But we find a very different view in Christian faith. In fact, Christianity gives us a very different picture. Christianity will show us, as we read this story over the next couple of weeks, an empowered woman, a woman who is clearly aware of what she wants, a woman who's willing to verbalize how she feels sexually and how it pertains to her desire. And it starts off by showing us in verse 2, she is in love and attracted to a guy, and she wants this guy to kiss him. Do we see that? I'm not making it up, right? That's right there. But what is it that draws so much attraction? Why is she so attracted to this guy? So we're going to find out here as we read along. So here's the first thing I want you to write down. There's 3 elements of attraction, and there's a chronology to it that we think is God's ideal. And the first one is this. It's spiritual attraction. We want to be attracted to somebody's soul. We want to be attracted to who God has made them to be, and their relationship with God ought to be the thing that inspires us most. So she says this in verse 3. She says, pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. That word name is so important here because here's what she's pointing to. She's not just attracted to this guy because he's got biceps and a six-pack and drives a nice car and has a nice job. That is not the thing that she's most compelled by. She's compelled by his reputation. She's compelled by his name. She's compelled by his integrity, the way in which he carries himself. This is a guy who does what he says he's going to do. This is a guy who treats people with respect. This is a man who's worthy of following and worthy of trusting because when no one else is looking, he's still the same kind of person. She says the reason why you're so attractive to all of the women in our community is because you are an all right, good guy. And then she goes on in verse 4. She says, take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers. Friends, I cannot make this up. This is your Bible, all right? It's how she feels. She is passionate about the man that she's wanting to be with. And she's very clear about what her desires are. And then the community jumps in. I think this is so valuable. We hear the chorus jump in, the friends, and this is what they say. They say, we rejoice and delight in you. We will praise your love more than wine. This is so valuable, isn't it? Because what we see here is it was a woman who's in love with a man, who's got good integrity and good character. And then there's a community who knows this woman. Most scholars say that these are the bridesmaids who are singing. These are her girls. These are the people that she's hanging out with on a Tuesday night. They've heard about him. They've seen him interact. And they say, yeah, we adore this kind of love. This is the kind of relationship that's worth having. You know, I do a lot of counseling with relationships that are broken, whether or not it be people that have been married for a long time, going through divorce, or people that are even in their premarital stage trying to figure out whether or not they should continue on with marriage. And what I find over and over and over again is that the people with the greatest amount of regret as it pertains to their relationships, particularly the romantic ones, are people who that did not heed the advice of the community that knew them best as they went along the road in that relationship. So important and so valuable that we allow people who love us and know us to speak into the romantic relationships we have in our life. She jumps in verse 4 and she says, how right they are to adore you. So this guy's character is intact. He's a solid guy. He loves God, and the community acknowledges that that's who he is. Now she's going to begin to speak about how she perceives herself. And this is what she says. She says, dark am I, yet lovely. Now, this is really important because the fact that she calls herself dark in that era in time is an indicator that she does not find herself to be too terribly attractive. Now, we live in a day and age, right, where tan and, right, like that's the good look, right? That's the good look if you're a woman. Back in the day, that wasn't the way it was. The more round or rotund you were and the lighter skinned you were was the more attractive version, because it meant that you were well fed. It meant that you came from a family that had money, and it meant that you didn't have to go out and work in the fields. This is not her story. She says, dark am I yet lovely, meaning there's something about me that's beyond my physical attraction that makes me attractive. She says, daughters of Jerusalem, I'm dark like the tents of Kedar, like the tent curtains of Solomon. She says in verse 6, do not stare at me because I am dark, because I'm darkened by the sun. Meaning, if the initial way you're going to take stock as to whether or not I'm a valuable person or not is by your initial looking at me, that you're going to find yourself missing out. She says, my mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of their vineyards. So my own vineyard I had to neglect. Meaning this, she's a working woman. She doesn't have time to be well kept like everybody else. She doesn't have a dad who's really rich, who's providing for her. She's had to go out and get a job. She's probably juggling multiple jobs, doing whatever is necessary to put food in her own stomach and maybe for the people in her family that she has to take care of. This is the situation she's in. This is a woman whose value is not just tied to how she looks, but who she is. Verse 7, tell me, you whom I love, where you graze your flock and where you rest your sheep at midday. Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends? A veiled woman in that day was a woman who would come to the edge of the fields, usually a single woman, who was needing some form of protection or wanted some form of compensation. And so while men were out working in the fields, they would come to the edge of the field during their lunch break. They would look for a veiled woman. The veil was an indicator that she was available. They would exchange finances or some kind of food for some kind of sexual intimacy, and then the guys would go on with their day. And she's saying, I don't want to be that kind of woman. I don't want to be the kind of woman who has to lower my standards so that I can find some kind of man to be in a relationship with. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in you and you alone, and I want to know where you are working, and I want to know where you're calling home, because my intentions is not to be with any other guy. I've already set my eyes and set my perspective on you. You are who I want to be with. I want you to see the importance of spiritual attraction today. Because when we think about the relationships that we're in or the relationships we hope to be in one day, it has to start with an equality of our perspective on who God is and who we want to be as people. In verse 3 and 4, we find he has a good reputation. We find that they're both sharing relationship in community. We find that she has a high moral character, which means that these two individuals are spiritual equals. You know, Paul talks about this in a letter that he writes to the church in Corinth, where he warns people, especially in the context of romantic relationships, not to find themselves connected to people that do not share their same spiritual values. I mean, these people worship the same God. They want to be the same kind of people. They want to have the same level of integrity. They match one another in character, and they don't want to have to drag the other person along as it pertains to relationship. And so the first question, if you're dating, the first question, if you're single, really an important question even if you're married, is how are we doing as it pertains to being people who are first drawn by somebody's spirituality? If we're married, have we put this on the back shelf, or are we actually thinking about how to cultivate deeper spiritual connection with our spouse? If you're dating, are you dating this person because what draws you to them is a spiritual connectedness where you feel like, wow, I can walk with them because they're going after the same God that I'm going after? And if you're single, I think this is a very important question. In a kind of swipe left, swipe right kind of culture where you have thousands of personalities and faces in your pocket, and there are numerous ways to maybe be engaged with somebody initially through physical attraction, are you willing to say, I'm not going to go deep into a relationship until I can acknowledge and connect with this person at a spiritual level? It's so, so important. Here's the second thing that we find. In verse 8, she says, if you do not know, this is what the chorus jumps in, most beautiful of women, follow the tracks of the sheep and graze your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. So they jump in. The scene is going to kind of shift now. She's been looking for her man. The chorus tells her he's over there, and she heads that way. And that's when we find the second element of attraction that's necessary in any relationship, emotional attraction. So it's a new scene in this play that's being conducted, and we're going to find that the man speaks next. It's been 8 verses, and we haven't heard from the guy yet, right? It's like real life. And what we find in verse 8 is that he's going to do his best to say something kind to the woman that he's interested in. And fellas, I hope you find great solace like I do as we read this next verse, because he tries his best, and it's kind of like a swing and a miss, all right? Here's what he says. He says, I liken you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariot horses. First thing out of his mouth. You look like a horse. Like, that's what he says. Don't try that one at home, fellas. Not going to get you far, okay? Now, if I got to modernize this, this is what he's saying, okay? Because Pharaoh's horses were not just any horse. They were specially bred, incredibly beautiful, powerful, strong, awe-striking animals. If I had to modern day it, it's not better, but this would be the version of it. It'd be like, in a world of PT Cruisers, baby, you're like a Ferrari. Like, that's what he's saying. He's acknowledging, man, when I see you, when I look at you, when I hear about your character, gosh, you are one of a kind. He goes on in verse 10 and says this, your cheeks are beautiful with earrings, your neck with strings of gold. I want you to focus in here on he begins to speak well of her. And this idea of cheeks and earrings, neck with gold, all of this idea of adorning. It's not about her physical beauty just yet. It's about who she is and how she carries herself. He says, man, when I look at you, when you walk into a room, you walk with dignity, you walk with character. In a world full of people that are just trying to get by, you have a higher standard. And what draws me to you is that level of emotional connection. He says in verse 11, we will make you earrings of gold studded with silver, meaning all I want to do is I want to invest in this woman. I want to invest in this relationship. And then she speaks, and she says this, while the king was at his table, my perfume spread its fragrance. Verse 13, my beloved. She begins to call him her beloved. My beloved to me is a sachet of myrrh resting between my breasts. So a sachet would be something where you would put aromatic spices inside of it. You would wrap it up, and you would either put it in your home or you would wear it on your body in some way, shape, or form to be able to emit some kind of perfume. And what she's saying here is this, is that this man and the relationship she has with him, this kind of man is a man that she wants to carry with her everywhere she goes. That life is just better when he is around. It's kind of like, when Stacey and I were in college, she went off to camp to work at Camp Windshape, and I went off to Barbados to suffer for Jesus on a missions trip there. And we were apart for about, that was funny, humor, get it? Like Barbados, beautiful place. Anyway, so we're there. And we were going to be apart for about three months, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to talk much or anything like that. And so right before I left, I took some cologne. She asked me for something that she could wear that would have my scent, and so I took some cologne, sprayed it on a shirt, and handed it to her, and she had that shirt, right? The idea being, man, like when we're apart, I just want to be together. That's what she's saying here. There's an emotional connection. Verse 14, my beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. Now, we read this in the 21st century and have no idea what she's talking about. But those who were singing these songs were Jewish songs that would be sung at a wedding. They'd be the songs that would be sung while the bride was getting ready for her wedding day, the songs that would be sung at the reception when they had their dance together. I mean, these were songs that everyone in the community knew. Everyone in the community knew what En-Gedi was. En-Gedi was this oasis in the middle of the desert. It was this place that was beautiful. In fact, you can actually go and visit it. It looks just like that. And it's this beautiful place where in the middle of this vast barren desert, you see palm trees popping up out of the horizon. You see water flowing. You find a place where you can be refreshed. It's a place of security and peace in the midst of a place that is incredibly barren. And she's saying, when I'm with him, I feel like I'm in an oasis. I feel like my time with him, it's just a time of refreshing. Every time I'm with him, I feel built up and encouraged, not discouraged. You notice that they move from a spiritual connectivity to an emotional connectivity, where he is valuing who she is. That's what we find in verses 9 and 10. And that he wants to honor her. We find that in verse 11. There's something about her that makes him want to serve her fully. And can we not agree that's the way that it works in real life too? I mean, when you're emotionally connected to somebody, you are willing to do whatever is necessary to love that person well. I think a great example of this is what we see on HGTV. Anybody ever watch like those House Hunter TV shows, right? It's like Tom and Sandra are looking for a $5 million flat in Manhattan. Tom is a out-of-work artist, and Sandra works at a preschool. It's like, how does the math work? You ever wonder? Like, I always am blown away by that. And the way that the story usually goes, right, is there's two homes that they look at, two apartments, whatever it might be. It comes to the end of the show, and they're kind of debating back and forth about which one they want to get. Tom really wants the one that's got, the cool den and the cool, place for the guys to hang out and watch, football. And Sandra really wants the one with the cute nursery and, the place for her to do her arts and crafts that, comes straight out of, a book and all that kind of stuff. And they sit down and they debate back and forth about what house they're going to pick. And who always wins? The woman always wins, right? Why? Because Tom is emotionally engaged and she gets what she wants. That's what he's saying here. Listen, when I'm around you, gosh, the world is so much better. It doesn't matter where we are or what we're doing. I just want to be with you. And she wants to be with him. We find that in verse 12. And she feels at peace when he is near. There's a beauty of emotional attraction here that I think is essential if we're going to have flourishing relationships. So spiritual attraction is where it starts. Emotional attraction is what ought to grow as people get to know each other better, which leads to finally physical attraction. And I think it's important to see this order because I think we live in a culture that starts with physical attraction and then tries to make emotional attraction happen and then hope that spiritual attraction occurs. And the reality is that when you do it in that order, sometimes it works, but most often than not, it doesn't. That's why the scriptures are very clear and teach us that beauty is fleeting. It doesn't last forever, but character, and that's something that endures. So he speaks and he says, how beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes are doves. I think he gets a checkpoint for that one. Well done, sir. Verse 16, she responds and she says, how handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming. She says, our bed is verdant. That means green or fruitful. Verse 17, the beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are firs. Basically, he's looked at her and they're spiritually attracted, they're emotionally attracted, they're physically attracted. He went first and told her how he feels about her. I think that you're beautiful. She says, I think that you're handsome. And then she keeps on going. She's like, this is what our bed's going to look like. This is what our house is going to look like. I've already got a Pinterest board. It's going to be great. That's what happens. But she struggles. She struggles to believe that out of all of the women in the world, he wants her. So she says this in chapter 2, verse 1. I am a rose of Sharon. I'm a lily of the valleys, meaning I'm nothing spectacular to look at. A rose of Sharon, lily of the valleys, the idea here is it's just a normal, everyday plant. It's just dime a dozen. There's nothing unique or special about me. And he jumps in and he says, no, like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. Meaning, no. Like, I know you think that you're just kind of normal every day, but when I see you, I see a beauty that no one else compares to. And she responds. She says, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, meaning you're different than all of the other guys too, is my beloved among the men. So here's an important point. I think sometimes in Christianity, we can over-spiritualize things and make it seem like physical attraction doesn't matter. It does. It absolutely matters. It's just not the most important thing. But here's what we find. In verse 15 in chapter 1 and 2, verse 2, is that she is his standard of beauty. Fellas, it means that when he looks at his soon-to-be wife, she's the standard. In a dating relationship, who you're dating, she's the standard. This is a beautiful picture, isn't it? Because we live in a culture where it's like, well, no, the standards is what's on the rack when you're checking out at the grocery store. The standard is what's on the reality TV show. The standard is what is being posted on social media. And God would say that's not how a healthy relationship is built. A healthy relationship is built when you can look at the person across from you that you are in a relationship with and say, you are my standard of beauty. So fellas, that means that if she's round, you're into round. Okay? If she's short, you're into short. If she's tall, you're into tall. She got brown hair, you're into brown hair. She got, blonde hair, you're into blonde hair. If she's got, white pepper hair, that's what you're into because the woman that you're with must be your standard of beauty. But I love how there's equity here because it's true the other way, isn't it? He is her standard of handsome, which means women. If he's a little bit more rounder than you wanted him to be, doesn't quite fit into his Letterman jacket anymore, you love that guy, all right? If he's got a whole lot of hair, you love the hair, even the hair on the back. If he doesn't have any hair on his head, if it's just running away from his head because it's scared, you love him anyway, all right? You love the man that God has given you, and you set that as your standard for attraction. Verse 16 and 17, they are sexually attracted to one another. Let's not miss this, okay? Part of a great relationship in the covenant of marriage, a man and a woman making promises together, is sexual intimacy. And there ought to be an attraction that is there. And married people, we have the responsibility, we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, to actually do our very best with what we've got to be attractive to our spouse. So there's spiritual attraction, there's emotional attraction, there's physical attraction, and then the song kind of culminates in this beautiful, beautiful image where both of them get to be something for one another that I think is the root of every good relationship. And I even would say if you're single is an important part of great friendships. That's what she says. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Verse 4, let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. There are three words here that I think are really important for us to capture. The first one is shade, the next one is banquet hall, and the final one is banner. We start with this phrase, shade. And remember, this is a woman who's been spending her entire life out in the heat, out in the sun, working to barely get by. And when she sees the man that she's in relationship with, she says, when I'm around him, I get to sit in his shade. Because this man is a protector. He is somebody that's created a space for his future bride to thrive, and he sees that as his responsibility. The banquet hall is indicative of the idea of going to a restaurant. That when they go out, it's because he planned the date. Fellas, you should be planning the dates, and we gave you a bulletin to help you out, all right? He thinks about me, and he provides for me. He takes me out to nice restaurants. He plans good dates. I know that when we're there, he's going to take care of me, and he's picking up the check. And let his banner over me be love. This phrase banner, when it would have been sung in that day and age, people would have immediately evoked this idea of a flag raised high on a hillside in the middle of battle. Because in the middle of a battle, remember, back in that day when you went to war, it wasn't like you got to, stand like basically, in the back, like, and kind of fly a drone. That wasn't the situation. You were face to face, right? You were feeling the breath of the person you were about to kill. You were experiencing the weight and the groans and the screams of the people around you. And it was hard in that mess to know who was fighting for who and where you needed to go to be safe. And the banner would be lifted high up on a hillside. So no matter where you were in the valley while you were fighting, you knew if I can get to that banner, that's my safety, that's my security, and that's where peace is. And what she's saying is in the midst of a life filled with battles, in the midst of a life filled with trauma and pain, in the midst of a life not knowing where to go and what's up from down, when I see him, I know that's where peace is. I know that's where security is. I know that's where safety is. Hear me. Write this down. An attractive partner brings protection, provision, and peace. So those of you who are dating right now, I want you to ask this question. Is the partner you're with somebody who you feel is going to protect you, who wants to provide for you and is willing to be a person of peace? In our marriages, this is our goal right here. Are we this to our spouse with God's help? Being a person who's protective of them, who's bringing provision to them, whether or not that be emotional provision or financial provision or just relational connection. And are we peace? Like, are we creating homes and environments, married folk, that when we pull into our driveway, we're happier to be there because it's peace when we walk in those doors? That's the job of everybody. 1 Timothy 5:8 says this, if anyone does not provide for the needs of their relatives, they've denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever. And 3 times in 1 Timothy 5, the word that's used there is he, and he. So fellas, I want you to look at me, okay? While this is a call to everyone, women have a responsibility to be protectors and providers and peacemakers. Fellas, I want you to hear me. the New Testament, Paul writing to Timothy, is really clear that if you are a married man, this is your responsibility. That your job is to be a person who provides, whether or not that be financially or emotionally, to a spouse who is able to, by virtue of education, bring financial capacity into the home. Your job is to be a provider. Your job is to be a protector. The woman that you're married to and the children that you have should know that they are safe with you. And you should be the leader of peace in your home by leading in a way where you don't lead with anger, you don't lead with force, but you lead with love. As a result of all of this, she looks at a man who's a protector, a provider, and a peacemaker. This is what she says. Strengthen me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. This is basically saying, get the chocolate, get the oysters, start the bubble bath. I'm into this guy. That's what that is right there. She's saying, I love this man and I want to be with him. Not because he's on the front of a magazine, not because he makes a ton of money, but because he's a man with spiritual character, emotionally available, and physically present. Verse 6, his left arm is under my head and his right arm embraces me. They are in kissing position, as I like to call it. And in that moment, remember we're in a play and this is a song. As this scene is working itself out and you've got, the bridesmaids and the friends kind of peering in, looking at what's going on, she lifts her eyes and she looks to the crowd and she says this, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, meaning I highly recommend, I implore you, by the gazelles and by the does of the field. And we read that and think that's such weird poetic imagery. But the word gazelle and doe in the Hebrew is actually very close phonetically to the phrase God Almighty and Lord of hosts. So what she's saying here is, I implore you by God Almighty and the Lord of angels, meaning I implore you by our God, the creator of the universe. This is not a joke. This is a really big deal. Do not arouse or awaken, that means stir up love, until it so desires. Meaning there's a time, there's a place, and there's a person to act upon those types of desires with. And until those things are true, this is a story between two adults. A woman who has a job, a man who is gainfully employed. This is not middle school love. This is not teenage love. This is adult love. Until that time has come. Wait. Wait, because there is a gift in waiting. So here's a question to consider. If you're single, I want to ask you this question today. Will you trust that while Christian culture tends to idolize marriage, that God does not? That Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, came as a man who was never married and inaugurated this great gift called the church. That Paul, who wrote half of the New Testament, who we lean on and learn from, was not married. And himself even said that it is a gift from God, sovereignly given, that if you're able to live single, fully devoted to God, the impact God can have in your life is immeasurable. Are we willing, single people, to trust in that truth? And that maybe if you desire to be in a relationship one day, that God will bring it to you when the time is right. Or if you've committed to a life of celibacy, that God will honor that. Or if you're single again, wondering if getting into a relationship again is the right decision or not, that if you trust God with it, he loves you more than your desires, and that he'll lead you in the right path. That's my prayer for those of us that are single. And recognizing that those desires inside of you, whether or not they're significant or not, they're actually good gifts from God, ultimately given to you to point you to the fact that the best place for that relationship to be completed is actually in a relationship with him. For those of us who are dating today, here's the question. Are you in a relationship that is spiritually, emotionally, and physically compatible? I can't tell you how many people I know jump into a relationship because the physical piece or the emotional piece is there. And it is so hard once you're physically active to be able to see things clearly. And if you're dating, I want to encourage you to really take stock in asking these questions. Are we connected spiritually? Do we want the same things when it comes to our walk with God? Do we want the same things when it comes to our emotional connection? For those of you that are in dating relationships and you've been kind of playing around with whether or not you need to move forward, let me encourage you that either take a step forward in your relationship or to evaluate whether or not it's a relationship worth having and have that honest conversation with the person that you're dating in this season. And for those of us who are married, here's the question I'd like to ask you, married people. Are you cherishing what is right about your partner? Are you complaining and comparing them to your version of who you think they should be? Because the reality is that God has given you who you've said yes to, who you've made promises to. And I know that for many of us in the room, there's this feeling of you don't know my husband. You don't know the wreck of a mess that I'm in. And I want to encourage you. While I do not know that, I do know a God who is able to make everything right. And that our best point in a broken marriage is to trust him and to know that even if the marriage doesn't get healed, God will heal us in the process. For those of us that find ourselves comparing our spouse against the social media storyline or the picture of what we think they ought to be, let me remind you that great marriages will never come from comparing and complaining. But great marriages can come from honoring the beauty of the person that God has given you. And I know that over the next couple of weeks, as we talk about an emotionally charged subject like this, we're all going to feel different things. And my question to all of us is, will you commit? Will you commit to the next 4 weeks, 4 more after today, of allowing God to speak to you about his heart for your stage of life, about his heart for what a healthy relationship looks like? And would you allow him to maybe mend some of the broken places and bring hope to some of the hopeless places? And maybe we'll just see God work a miracle in your life. There's really good news. There's really good news for every single one of us today. As I read the story of Solomon, what I can't help but see over and over again is while this is a love song between two people that are in love with each other, it's an image of a greater love song that's being sung to us all the time about who God is and how he loves us. That this woman who feels not unique, who says, don't look at me out of shame, would be met with a lover who would say, oh, I love you just as you are, and I want to be in relationship with you. That's the gift of what God has done for every single one of us in Jesus. He's come to mend what is broken, to restore what is whole, and to love us as we are.